Today's seminar is about what is going on in my project and is controlling change important. We will be talking about the Agile application as well as other project management type applications. Here are some questions you need to answer in your own mind. Are your projects over budget? Are your projects behind schedule? Do your projects provide more scope than is required or less scope than is required? You could add to it as well. Are your projects chaotic? Do your projects go on forever and they never end? Are you overwhelmed by requests for change? Do your Agile projects have a 12-month estimated completion, but 5 years later, they're still being worked on? Believe it or not, I had a man in one of my classes that was the case. As we think about that, if any of those conditions apply to you, then your project is basically out of control. Sadly to say, but about 80% of all projects fail. Now, the reason they fail is because they do not meet the scope, cost, or schedule requirements for the project. Now, I'm not saying that they don't function as intended. They may function as intended, but they fail because they have not met the objectives of the project itself. So now we have several different methodologies or types of projects that we often use. But the purpose of this slide is to show you the difference between predictive, iterative, and incremental and agile projects with regards to change. Now, in a predictive environment, we call that traditional. Some people call it waterfall. Predictive, change is constrained as much as possible. Now, we will make changes if we need to, but we don't like to. We have developed a plan, a project management plan, and we want to follow that plan, and we're going to constrain change as much as possible. In iterative and incremental types of projects, change is incorporated at periodic intervals. But look at Agile. In Agile, change is incorporated real time during delivery. Basically, in Agile, we say, bring it on. You want to change? Bring it on. We'll accommodate you with that change. Agile is a different type of project management. It was developed by a group of software developers that said the traditional approach just does not work for us. And this group of people sat down and they identified what they're going to do different with the Agile Manifesto. Now look at this item here in yellow. Responding to change over following a plan. Agile is very open, very transparent, and as far as changes go, if you want to change, bring it on. We'll make that change either in this iteration or within the next iteration. Now, the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. Look at number 2. Welcome changing requirements even late in the development. Agile process harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. If it's something you need, customer, we'll give it to you. Let us know what it is. We'll give it to you. We welcome that change. We want to give you the best competitive advantage that we possibly can give. I was doing this project. It was to integrate the new product introduction system, the CAD/CAM system, with our ERP system. Now, as a project manager on that, we had a group of product engineers that I worked with. And so we would pull those product engineers in and get their feedback from them. It was more of an agile project, at least this part of it was, than it was a traditional project. The product engineering team to help me develop the system, to tell me what they wanted. We would go off and I'm not a programmer, but I was a project manager. And so we'd go off and we would develop some integration. So then I'd pull the product engineers into a meeting. I'd pull them into a computer meeting. We'd sit around the computer, and I'd show them exactly what we'd done. Sometimes they liked it, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they had suggestions on ways to do it better. That's Agile. The customer looks at it, they evaluate it, they want changes made to it, they give us recommendations on it, and then we go ahead and then make those changes to it. Now remember, changes are welcome even late in the project. Even late in the project, changes are welcome. I wanted to show you this just as a pictorial view of a Scrum flowchart. But the reason I wanted to show this to you is because there's several places here that we might actually make changes. For example, in our release planning meeting, we may make some changes to what we're going to be releasing and how. Product vision meeting, same thing. When we set up our sprints or our iterations, same thing. When that deliverable is accepted by the customer, same thing. When we have a retrospective, which is basically an Agile version of lessons learned, we look at what we did and we look for areas of improvement. And then with those areas of improvement, we might make changes in the future iteration of it. Now those changes would be recorded into the product or iteration backlog. And here's an example of that product backlog. This is a product, so it's a high-level backlog, but we could also have it within an iteration backlog. Now if I want to make a change, I'm simply going to list it in this backlog. The product owner, who's a customer's representative or the customer, is going to review that, make sure that it's needed, okay? And then what they will do is they will prioritize this backlog so that you can deliver the most value to the customer the soonest. So that's the product backlog. That would be a means of actually documenting the changes and recording them and then actually implementing those changes. So now, when I look at a predictive or a traditional type project, we have what's called the 10 by 5 by 49 right here. What that says is we have 10 knowledge areas, we have 5 process groups, and internal to that framework we have 49 processes. One of those processes right here in integration management under monitoring, controlling process group is called perform, integrate, change control. That is totally focused on dealing with changes, approving changes, evaluating changes, investigating the impact of the changes on the project itself. When we look at a change in a traditional project, if that is a scope change, for example, we're looking not only at scope, but we're looking at schedule, we're looking at cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholders, all of the processes. We're looking at all of those to see what the impact on the project is. This is just a pictorial view of that 10 by 5 by 49. Here are the different processes in this chart where change requests may generate from. A change request can come from an initiating process, a planning process, an executing process, a monitoring and controlling process, or a closing process. Not likely on closing, because when we close a project, we're done. We're transferring the deliverable to the customer. We're done. No more change requests when we close the project. So these change requests come out of these different processes here, and they go into that perform, integrate, change control. And in perform, integrate, change control, we look at the impact of that change request on the whole project. We approve that change request. Then that approved change request is incorporated into our project. Here is what I call a practical project management flow. This flow is based on that 10 by 5 by 49 that I just showed you, that had all the processes on it. But what I've done here is I have put them into a logical order in which we will work them. Now your change, your requirements may be different than what this is. This is what one of the courses is all about, practical project management. How to best develop your methodology that you're going to use to manage projects. So right here we look at perform integrated change control. That's that process that was in the 10 by 5 by 49. So if you look at this, each one of these processes right here has been mapped out into this flow right here. When I look at this, I want to talk just briefly about those approved change requests. So those approved change requests are an output of perform integrated change control. They flow as an input into control quality. In control quality, we're checking the deliverable to make sure the change request has been incorporated in it. That approved change request is also an input into direct and managed project work right here. Direct and managed project work is where you do all the work on the project. You're working on the deliverable itself. That's where you would incorporate the change request. That approved change request also flows as an input into control procurement down here. Control procurement, you would take that approved change request. If it changed something that you were procuring, you would make sure it was incorporated into the deliverable that you're receiving from the vendor. That approved change request is very important. That is how I change the cost baseline, the schedule baseline, and the scope baseline. That's how I modify it. That's how I change it. Change requests are issued anytime there's a need to change the plan or the work that's being done, or both. It must be issued to correct variances. If my scope plan and actual scope results has a variance, I need to address that variance. I need to correct it. I need to bring them in alignment with each other. Change requests. We're looking from planned results to actual results, and if there's a variance, then we take action to correct that variance. Change requests are used to document plan changes and plan formats, document formats, drawings, and different things. So change requests, personnel changes, all those types of things are very important for us to use. In a traditional project management methodology, that's your WOW, that's your way of working. The methodology is your WOW. You need to have a change control system that starts off, and that is inclusive of your change management plan and the processes, the system that you will use to manage changes. Now, this is applicable in predictive and hybrid projects. Now, in an agile way of working is established as the methodology, how we're going to work in an agile environment, and then changes are introduced through user stories. If you're familiar with Agile, you know that user stories tell you what you're going to develop for that particular project. If you want to change, you have a new user story that's written that describes what you want, and then that would be incorporated into that backlog that I showed you earlier. In a traditional or a predictive environment, the baselines, 3 of them, scope, schedule, and cost, are all the original plus approved change request. Original plus approved change request. So that's how I can keep my project on track with itself. If I have a variance in cost, I issue a change request to address that cost, and then I update my cost baseline to reflect that, along with scope or schedule if I need to update those as well. In a traditional predictive type project, we have what's called the iron triangle or triple constraint: scope, time, and cost. If I change the scope of the project, I add more scope to it. In all likelihood, I'm going to add more cost, and in all likelihood, I'm going to add more time to my schedule. So a change in one leg of the triangle will cause a change in at least one of the other legs, if not both of the other legs. Now, as a project manager, you have a lot of different balls in the air at the same time. Look over here. One of them is change. You are balancing change. You are influencing factors that cause change. In hybrid, agile, in traditional, you're on top of your project. You're proactive with your project. You are balancing all of these things together, and you're influencing these factors. If I'm in a traditional type project and I'm building a house, and I've got the house under roof, framed in, closed in, the customer wants to add another room to it, what am I going to do? I'm late in the project. If they want that added, are we going to add it, or are we going to influence the factors and say, hey, let's finish this part of the house up and do another project, add that additional room onto it for you. Perform integrated change control process. This is the tools and techniques and outputs of that process. You have as a primary input right here your change request. We use change control tools. That is basically how we're going to investigate the change, the necessity of the change, the impact of the change. Now that's going to vary from project to project somewhat. It certainly will vary from one company to another company. And so there's no ironclad change control tools that you're going to use, but these are tools that would be appropriate for whatever project, whatever organization that you work with. Our output is the approved change request. We showed you the flow of that earlier. And then we have also updates to the project management plan, any component, and particularly the baselines. And then project document updates, any document that might be affected by this change. Now, this perform integrated change control, all changes, regardless of where it comes from, as I showed you in that chart, all changes flow into this process. Change requests are evaluated for their impact on the project. A decision is made on the change request. Is it rejected? Is it deferred? Or is it accepted? Now, the change management plan is going to define for us how we will perform integrated change control. We can change how the work is being done, what work is being done, or a combination of both. Now, this is applicable in predictive and hybrid projects. In an agile project, the product owner is going to approve that user story, and they'll prioritize it in the backlog for the iteration that is coming up. Sometimes you may incorporate it even within the current iteration. It just depends on what the change is, the importance of it, and the impact. As we are developing in a traditional project, as we are developing the plans, the scope baseline, the schedule baseline, the cost baseline, as we are developing those, we're going to be changing constant changes. Now, I don't have to issue a change request every time I'm making a change to any of those until they are formalized. Once I have a formal project management plan, then to make a change, I have to issue a change request to change the plan itself. Now, there are two subsidiary plans that are related to change that are part of the project management plan. That is the configuration management plan and the change management plan. Now, the change management plan, it's a part of the project management plan. It's created in the process that's called Develop Project Management Plan. And it is applicable to predictive and hybrid projects. It's the how-to plan. How do I control changes? How do I manage changes? How do I approve changes? Who can do it? Who's authorized to issue a change request? In Agile projects, changes are incorporated with the current iteration or a future iteration, the backlogs that is. And generally changes are not a concern in a Agile project because the iterations are short. Usually an iteration lasts about no more than 8 weeks. Sometimes they're 1 week, sometimes 2. It just varies. But seldom do they ever exceed 8 weeks. And again, Agile embraces all changes. Why would I accept changes in Agile at will and I would control them in a traditional project? Well, number one, in an Agile project, my investment in time and materials in an Agile project is less. Why is it less? Because it's short. It's 4 to 8 weeks long. So I have not done much work. Yeah, I've done 8 weeks worth of work, but it's nothing I can't really change easily. But on the other hand, take that house that we were building. I got it under roof, I got it closed in, and now he wants to add a room to it. That's a monumental change. I got to pour new footings, new floors, new walls, new roof, all of these things. So that's quite an investment into a traditional type of a project. The difference would be the amount of work and amount of investment that has been done that would drive Agile to accept changes more easily than you can in a traditional environment. Now here is a change management plan. As I said, this is part of the project management plan. Our project management plan has 19 subsidiary components associated with it. Change management plan is one of those 19 components. We're talking about the change management approach. We're talking about the definition of change with regards to schedule, budget, scope. How about document changes? How about a change control board? Is that necessary? How about the change control process? What is the flow of the change request once it's issued? Who can issue that change request? All right, so here is the change management plan. And you can see that I have listed in here my approach to handling changes. You need to understand, how are you going to handle changes? What are you going to do? What is the process? How deep are you going to investigate the changes? All sorts of information should be written up about your change management approach. Then, what is a schedule change? What says that I need to issue a change request? Then, what is a budget change? What is a scope change? And then project document changes, such as the plan or the documents that we use. How are we going to handle that? In this case, I don't really have a change control board. In this case, I am the sole approval source for it, and I have full approval authority for all change requests. Now, in some organizations, you will have a change control board. This change control board might be a controlling board where they approve change requests, they evaluate change requests. They might be a technical support type of a board where they are advising the project manager. That, of course, would need to be specified. What is the role of your change control board? And then change request submittal, tracking of it, reviewing of it, and disposition, and additional information that might be needed in your change management plan. Now notice this is not 10 pages long. It's 1 page long. You always want to keep your documents, your forms simple, your plans, keep them simple because you want people to use them. If you write a 10-page document on change control, who's going to use it? Nobody. So keep it simple. That's always a philosophy as you're developing your way of working or your practical project management methodology. So we have here our change log. A change log is kind of important to know what changes have been made, what the status of the changes are. We have this change control log for a traditional type project. In an Agile, changes are introduced through user stories and they would be recorded into the iteration backlog. You could indeed, and you could indeed have a change log if you chose to in your way of working. To me, a change log is pretty important because I want to know what's going on in my project. Here is an example of a change log. Pretty straightforward. There's nothing scientific about it. We basically list all of the changes that come through us into the change log, and we just show the description and who it came from and submission date, status, and then disposition of that change. All right, we have another aspect. Here's the change request. And I want you to notice that we have the area that's affected, category. Then we have a detailed description of the change. Justification for the proposed change. This, of course, will be done by the person that is submitting the request. The impact of the change on scope, quality, requirements, cost, schedule, stakeholder impact, comments, disposition, and then justification for the disposition, and then who it's approved by. So once again, you can see that we have listed the detailed description. The scope is increased in this case. The quality must meet high standards, so it would be modified if necessary. Requirements are increased, and in the descriptions. Cost increased, and then we have a description or limitation. Description of schedule, and then stakeholder impact, and then comments. This change was approved. The client required this, and it was within the budget of $900,000, so we could do it. But now I want you to look at this. We looked at cost, schedule, scope, requirements, stakeholders, everything in this evaluation of this change request. And that's what we have to do. This is vital. This is vital. An effective project manager will influence factors which cause change and will proactively manage the project to prevent unnecessary changes from overwhelming the project. Now, one of you mentioned as scope creep. If you do not control changes, you cannot control scope creep. You need to really control changes to be able to control scope creep. One of the things that is so critical in project management is, as a project manager, you should be and must be put in charge of your project. That gives you the authority then to approve or disapprove certain requirements if they're not a fit for this project, or to approve or disapprove change requests, or to influence factors that cause change. You should always be proactive in looking out and seeing what's coming down the road and then taking action before it gets there so that you can avoid those situations that are detrimental to your project. Configuration management. Configuration management plan. The best way to describe a configuration management plan is to make sure that everyone is singing on the same sheet of music. Everyone has the correct drawings to be used. Everyone has the correct prototype, the latest prototype that they're working on. Everyone has the latest project management plan that they are working on. Configuration management is all about revision control. In this, it is applicable to Agile, Predictive, and hybrid projects. Now, in Agile, you may not have a formal plan. You need it. You need something that tells you how you're going to control the revision of your, let's say, software, for example. As you are developing software, you're going to have different revisions of that software, and you want to make sure everybody's working on the most current revision. How do you make sure that one revision from another, how you can distinguish between them, and how everyone is working on the current? So this would be a part of your WOW, your way of working, in both a traditional and or a agile type of a project approach. Configuration management plan. Here is the configuration management plan. Let's pull it up and look at it real quick. When we're talking about configuration, first of all, what are you going to configure? What's your configuration approach? If you're doing prototyping, what is going to be your revision control for prototypes to make sure everyone's working on the current one? If you have documents such as drawings or plans, whatever it might be, how are you going to distinguish the correct revision and make sure that everybody's using that current revision? If you have files such as a software file, okay, or a document file, or a plan file, how are you going to control the revisions of those files? And then change control. How are you going to handle those changes, control of those different revisions? Then you have your roles and responsibilities, and then any other relevant information you might need for this. I want to thank you very much for attending today.